What up? How y'all doing? How y'all feeling? You straight today? You drunk your proper amount of water today? You know what I'm saying? You got something on your stomach? You alright? You know, just making sure, just checking in, family. Just checking in. Now, before we get into it, gotta shout out them members. Shout out Tyshawn Cleveland. Appreciate you, my guy. New lieutenant inducted into the D-Nation family. Now I got another addiction story for you. This is y'all weekly story coming from the Survivor membership, and I hope y'all enjoy it. Now, as a disclaimer for this story, it may lose you somewhere in the middle, but don't fret, don't trip, don't stress. It's gonna make sense. All right? You see what I'm talking about? Let me get up out of here. I hope you love the story. Without further ado, I go by DJ, but you can call me D.
So I go extra hard on that hard flow.
Call me D. It's almost the end of the year, and the 35-year-old guy named Gary made his way into those double doors of the rehabilitation clinic. This being his third attempt at getting clean. He made it his business to make this one count. Standing at the entrance, heads bowed, his mother and younger sister said a prayer to cover him on his journey before he checked in. His first attempt was a year and a half ago. It was a hasty spare of the moment, fresh off a bender where his sister found him OD'd on the living room floor. She checked him into rehab the next day, but wouldn't be a week before he checked out. And 6 months back, it was court ordered for him to attend rehab a second time after pawning some electronics he stole from his mother's house. After picking his longtime poison, he was arrested after overdosing behind the wheel, crashing his car into a nearby home not too far from his home. He would stay for at least a month this go round, but as he did the first time, he checked out, believing he was too far gone. The woman who was once his wife filed for custody of their child and moved to a better side of town. She vowed to never let their son see him in such a horrible condition. It's present day, and Gary is on another mission to find his fix. Being used to not having much, his life of addiction trained Gary to survive with little to nothing to work with. Donating plasma, blood, sperm were his plan B go-tos when friends and family turned him down for countless handouts of favors. He took his hustles up a notch, connecting with a money counterfeiter. He'd take the fake bills into several different stores, buying a small item for the real cash that he would get back. He would actually sometimes go to the thrift store, find a good looking pair of shoes, and soup them up to look exclusive, so to sell them for 5 times more the actual price. And every time someone would catch on, he would change up his hustle. But one hustle that he always went back to was money counterfeiting. But these owners would eventually catch on also, calling the cops on Gary seconds after he left out the last time he did it. He luckily got away, but because his face was so well known, there wasn't too many places to go. He hid out in his mother's garage for a few hours that was decorated as a den or a game room when younger family members came over for gatherings or sleepovers. But there was one person who knew this was his getaway spot, and that was his wife. Startling Gary, as the garage door flew open, he saw his wife and son standing there. She screamed for him to come out, saying she knew he was there. She got a call from his sister and his mother, who both got calls from the police officer who personally knew Gary since a child, showing up to all his little league games, his high school games, middle school games, tutoring him, walking him home from school. This police officer was there for him even when his father was still around. He acted as an extra layer to this family, solidifying that whole meaning that it takes a village. So they all wanted to help Gary because of the person they know him to truly be. High school MVP 3 times in a row, winning little league championships, volunteering at church giveaways, and feeding the homeless. He was a very compassionate, determined, and successful young man. So at the young age of 19, it shocked everyone when he turned to drugs as a way to cope after his father passed away of lung cancer. He just kept saying it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair. His dad never smoked anything a day in his life, never harmed a soul. So why did God take him so early? Believing everything he knew about his own Christian faith was a lie. But considering Gary's life was never really touched by trauma, married at 18, having a son months after, for that to be his first real experience with loss, and for it to be that huge, he didn't deal with it well. Gary poked his head up from behind the old cars that sat in the garage, furious that his wife brung their son along. He came out screaming harsh remarks toward his wife, but she already knew what he was going to say. Told him that his son demanded to see him, saying they saw him running down the street away from the cops a few hours earlier. And as much as she wanted to keep their promise to keep him away from this grisly sight, his son already knew what type of man his dad was. His son walked over to Gary, who lost so much weight it looked as if his son could crush him. Standing at 6'4", just like his father, he looked him in the eye and gave him a hug, a much needed hug. And they all sat there, holding each other for a while until Gary said it was time. His son begged him to not go back to jail, but Gary said he was going somewhere else. A day later, Gary, his mother, sister, wife, and son were all at the same double doors he's been to 2 times prior. And Gary would say this time it felt different, because he actually wanted to go inside. He actually want to go, instead of it being forced on him. They said a prayer and Gary checked in. Months would pass, with Gary doing 10 times better than any other time at rehab, taking his meds as directed, going to meetings, exercising, the whole 9. He reconnected with his son, talking with him on a regular throughout the day, and everything was looking good. But then came a new arrival, whose track record was longer than Gary's, and he also had a way with bucking the system while still attending the program. This new arrival named Steve slipped in a few grams of heroin in the lining of his underwear and would get high throughout his whole stay. And Gary, he caught him using one day, and Steve offered, but he gladly resisted the urge, thinking of only one thing: his wife and son. Steve would offer it to him several more times, but Gary stood firm on his decision to actually work the system, telling Steve he should leave if he's not ready, telling him not to tarnish anyone else's progress because you want to fuck up your own. Now, as much progress as Gary has made, he still has urges here and there. One of these days, he calls his son in order to keep his mind off the free offer he got from Steve, and in doing so, he called at a rather bad time. His son, picking up the phone sounding agitated, he asked him what was wrong, and he would tell Gary that he was mad with his mother for introducing a new man into his life. Gary was so engulfed with his own problems, finding new hustles and ways to make money to feed his addiction, that he totally forgot about his marriage staying whole and solid, never imagining his wife finding another man, which his son was furious about. How could she date someone else while his father was trying to better himself? Gary could hear the whole interaction over the phone, and it made it that much more difficult to fight his urges. His wife snatched the phone from his son, telling him that he should understand her plight, her position, her feelings being disregarded through this whole ordeal. And surprisingly, he did understand. This was just the first time he actually thought about it. So his wife convinced him to speak some sense into his son. He sat on the phone with him for the next 20 minutes, explaining why it's all his fault and that he needed to be more considerate towards his mother. His son snapped the fuck off on him.
Who are you to tell me what to do? You just a liar and a fucking junkie. How you gonna roll over and let some stranger take your family away? You just gonna bitch up on us like that? Man, your ass ain't gonna change for shit.
Gary could hear his wife in the background screaming, trying to take the phone from him, but him being as tall as his father with a solid body weight, being an athlete himself, overpowered her easily and hung up in his dad's face. He runs out the house, leaving his mom crying where he thrown her to the floor. And miles away, Gary was doing the same, breaking down, feeling useless to his family at this point. Somewhere on the south side of town, there was Gary's son, speeding his mother's car down the highway with a face full of tears. He had a destination in mind, but wasn't sure he was up for what he was planning to do. He pulled up at a suburban home inside a quiet cul-de-sac. He sat in that car for hours, patiently waiting. Meanwhile, Gary calls back his wife, but didn't get an answer. And he would try several times more, but no pickup. He moped around most of the day, having what felt like the weight of the world on his head. And he again runs into Steve. Gary thought that he would run out of his product by now, because it was only one way you could get drugs into this facility, and that was bringing them in on your way through the door. It was now close to a month since Steve has been a patient himself, and he was still getting high, wondering how could he stay high with all of this staff doing rounds and checking in. He's dozing off at meetings, and it was like nobody saw this but him. So he knew something was off. Something was wrong. And that night, he understood what was going on. He saw Steve coming back into the room late, about 2 in the morning, seeing one of the staff members pass off a package. Now granted, This was none of his business. This had nothing to do with him, and he didn't want no parts of it. But he also felt some type of call of duty to do something about it, because there were people here who actually wanted to change their lives. There were people here who actually wanted to make a difference with their families. So to have this person here counteracting all of that progress infuriated him. So he approached Steve, trying to convince him to stop bringing in drugs, or he would tell somebody. And Steve assured him that nothing would happen if he did, but he also wouldn't recommend it, in a very calm demeanor. And Gary said he ain't want no trouble. He just felt that maybe he should get a room change or found a different facility somewhere far away from him. Because as much as he wanted to help others, he really felt himself breaking, feeding into that urge to use again. But then Steve said two names that caught Gary's attention more than ever. And that was Maggie and Milton, which were his wife and son's names. Just knowing that this guy knew this destroyed him on the inside. He wigged the fuck out, beating Steve down in the room right there in the moment. Staff members come in a few minutes later, hearing all the noise and commotion, and separated the two. Now this wasn't a prison, but there was a room similar to solitary where one person was allowed to be in there on their own. Gary sat in this room feeling if he made a mistake, not knowing what Steve would do next, just hoping that he would make it to see another day. He thought about checking out himself to go find and protect his family, but he only had a few more months to do before he was fully done with his stay at this facility. He also felt he wasn't ready if he still craved any drug use activity. He wakes up that next morning to an early, urgent visit, and it was Officer Thompson. The officer who's been looking out for him for damn near his entire life. He sat down with Gary, and he could tell that this was bad news, with his face hot red like he had just got in a fight. Now while Officer Thompson tried to find his words, Gary blurted out, "It's my family, ain't it? They dead? I knew I should have left well alone, man. What happened?" The officer picked his face up, all his movements stopping in an instant, hearing what Gary said, asking him, "What would make you say that? Who you been talking to?" Gary went on to tell him about the roommate Steve, who had drugs on him, trying to offer him a chance to use again, saying that he thinks he lightweight threatened his family if he said anything about it, telling him about the staff member who passed off the package. Now Officer Thompson, distracted from the real reason he actually came by, asked Gary does he know what the staff member looked like, or at least his name, saying there was a person using facilities just like this as ground zero to sell drugs. They start by offering it to you, then they make you pay after. But because Gary never accepted it, he wouldn't know. He wrote down everything Gary told him, saying he would look into it later, but it's more pressing information that he needed to know. He grabbed Gary's hands. Gary looked up at him in a weird way, asking, "Okay, what's going on? You scaring me." Officer Thompson stands up and says that he is the reason Gary is an addict. And before he could get a word in, he cuts Gary off, saying he is his biological father. His mother couldn't fathom her husband knowing she had an affair behind his back. But getting pregnant was the real mistake. She went back and forth on getting an abortion or not. And by the time she came to terms with it, it was too late. She was too far along. So they both agreed to keep it a secret. So every day after the day the person he thought was his dad died, his dad was still here the whole time. He just didn't know it. And after receiving this big blow, Gary didn't have a word to add after, but admitted to himself it makes a lot of sense. Officer Thompson got a call from Gary's wife, Maggie, asking for his help. He asked what was wrong and that he had Gary here with him. And she asked him to not bring Gary and don't tell Gary nothing. He's been doing good and I don't want to add stress he didn't need at the time. So after they said goodbye, Gary still speechless, he went back into his room of solitude just in time for breakfast. And when he was finished, he felt sick, throwing up, feeling as if his airways was closing, not able to call for help. He laid in the middle of the floor, staring at the ceiling, slowly fading away. Steve had found a way to spike his drink with fentanyl that he got from that same staff member who's been supplying him this whole time. Miles away, Thompson finally met up with Maggie, finding out that Milton, Gary's son, had murdered his mother's boyfriend. Sitting in the back seat of the squad car, Officer Thompson couldn't help but feel if they were honest from the beginning, they could have prevented all the chain of events that would happen after. Looking at his grandson resembling his son Gary at that age, he grabbed hold of him, hugging him for the first time and vowed to help him in any way that he could. But Officer Thompson, Maggie, and Milton had other news that has yet to catch their attention. News of Gary being found dead inside that rehab facility. Now the message I want to leave with y'all today, it's going to be simple. You know, addiction doesn't have a face. It doesn't have a description, a specific variety, a group, because it can happen to anybody. Doesn't matter how much support you got, no matter how much trauma you went through, because it can go either way. You could have the roughest childhood in the world, grow up and never touch a drug. And you can also have the best childhood in the world, grow up and be addicted to everything. So I guess you can say we all just learn as we go. But until then, don't ever stop trying to beat this shit. Because yeah, us as humans, we all come in different shapes, sizes, colors, and shades. But for the people dealing with addiction, we all wear the same face. And that's all I got. Y'all stay safe, y'all stay positive, y'all stay sober. If you ain't moving, you losing. And we out, babe. Call me, D.
Hustler talk, no comment though, just paper chase. Chasing my dreams, my nightmares ain't got no money, just a cardboard sign and they existing so